Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, The Last Mile Problem. In 2017, I donated to Project for Awesome, which is an annual charity drive run by Hank and John Green. This year, it earned $2 million for various charities, one of which was Last Mile Health. They were discussing a logistics problem. It first was noted in communications, and it seems highly relevant to the interests of House McCurray. The Red Caps in the early version of the game were a postal service, but they're now essentially a logistical service. They spend a lot of their time buying stuff on behalf of Magi. They own merchant ships, for example, and have a network of factories, a term which means something like warehouses in period. The last mile is a problem for them either way, so let's define terms. The last mile problem is that when you ship something from one place to another, half the total shipping cost is paid in the final little part of the trip. The mile is a metaphorical measurement. In Australia, we call it the last kilometre problem because we like base 10 measurements. It happens because most of your economies of scale are stripped out in the final mile. Say I want to move a box of scrolls from a convent in Normandy to a convent in Scotland. The item gets picked up by a guy who comes on a schedule and grabs all the stuff to go on to all of the other Magi, not just from my convent, but everyone on his route. He drops it at a certain point, Confluensis in this case, and then sailing is the cheapest and fastest way to get around Mythic Europe, so all the stuff from Normandy gets shipped to a mercer house there. Presumably the material for Lochlegan Tribunal gets shipped to a large port like Leith. They need to go to a port and walk or ride, and if you're riding, you need to maintain horses. Notice that from House McCurray's perspective, the cheap bit on a per mileage basis is the middle bit. Having a postie on a route is less expensive than a courier making individual deliveries, but both are a lot more expensive than if they could just get Magi to have a post box and turn up to collect their items. I'm guessing this makes Venice, which has chapter houses from all over the place, a mail shipping node. Similarly, House Tremare has a tribunal every year, and that makes it a seasonal mail node. I presume it must be, given the quantity of stuff exported. While that's not on, they have a house covenant with the quaesitors at a decent port. So messages travel faster and more cheaply between high-volume nodes. I'm kind of surprised we haven't tried to map this, since it's obvious that there's high-volume traffic in valuable items and information between these sites. One problem is that they seem to exist only erratically. Let's assume Magvilius is a node. I'm not sure why it should be. It's so close to Venice that there are good reasons for it not to be. But let's assume that it's worn a strong historical groove in Hermetic society, and so it has a sort of sunk cost inertia. Does each tribunal have at least one node? There's a good reason to assume that each, if it exists, is near a port. It doesn't have to be near the largest city. Paris, for example, is less good a distribution node than Confluensis is because sea travel is just better than land travel. This means, for example, that there's some question as to if Icy North in the Greater Alps is a node, or if their whole thing is run from Magvillas. The Alps are crossed only by two paths, and getting ships through Gibraltar is annoying enough that the network might need a logistical station in the mountains here. We know there are some obvious other nodes: Shrouded Glen in Transylvania, Alexandria in Thebes, London Mercer House in Stonehenge. There's an obvious lack of a central house in other places. Three Lakes in Novgorod doesn't seem to have this, for example. In the Rhine, is it Fengeld or Dürrenmahr? In Iberia, might it be Barcelona? It's the best of the four described, although it's still not great. It's rather small and rather secretive. I'm also tempted to suggest that it's unlikely because transshipping between Provençal and an Iberian node is one of the ways of getting around the whole Alps-Gibraltar business. The other way is to put a canal between the Rhine and the Danube. Charlemagne wanted one, and in the real world, very recently, they've made one. But if you wanted to make one, how would you keep it secret? Could you, for example, make an underground tunnel? When a system's obviously imperfect, that leads to story ideas. We can see, if we look at the Order using the last mile problem as a key concern for House McCurae, that they need several new nodes. That's a great reason to have a spring covenant that's continually forced to maintain the network, travel to other covenants, and source rare materials.